A guardian angel helps save a suicidal businessman by showing him what life would be like if he didn't exist. Join us as we chat about Hanukkah scarves, a Bernie Sanders-esque rant, and a very young old maid. An angel gets his wings as we find out if It's a Wonderful Life stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and Merry Christmas. Welcome to the Test of Time podcast. It's a wonderful podcast. My name is Alan Noah, and joining me, as always, is you, James Brief.
James Brief, I'm not a Jimmy, but today we're going to watch Jimmy Stewart.
He was credited as James Stewart.
He is known as Jimmy Stewart. I didn't just make that one up.
Of course. I'm just saying that on the movie poster, it does say James Stewart.
Correct.
But I like that you're so familiar with him that you can just call him Jimmy, this actor who's been dead for a while. But it's our Christmas episode, and you and I are both Jewish. But I'm married to a woman who is not Jewish, so I celebrate Hanukkah, I celebrate Christmas, and literally last night, Courtney and our daughter wanted to watch Elf. I was like, yeah, let's watch Elf. We've watched Elf a million times, but why not? And I was kind of thinking about it in terms of me being a Jew who now has these Christmas traditions. What are your memories of Christmas and Hanukkah and the holidays from growing up?
You know, for me, as a Jewish kid growing up, the thing I always liked about Christmas was simply, that it also meant Hanukkah was coming. Because as a kid,
Sure.
You had 2 times a year you can get a toy. It was your birthday and then Hanukkah. My parents gave presents every other day for Hanukkah, not 8 days of presents, but only the first day was a
Interesting.
toy. That was the one you wanted. It was either when you were a little kid, it was the action figure, and then later it was like the video game or computer game. But the next days, I put in air quotes gifts because they were like, they were mom gifts to you. They were like a nice shirt to wear for school, not a cool shirt to wear.
Something with a collar.
It would definitely be socks, and then your personalized little stationery, which you don't consider a gift when you're 13, 14 years old.
It was something cool on the odd nights and then clothes on the even nights?
No, we only got gifts on the odd nights, but
okay.
only the good thing was the first night. Like I got one,
okay.
For example, I get one Nintendo game a year in 4th grade. That was the first night of Hanukkah. The third night of Hanukkah, everyone got a scarf that had your initials on it. This was not 8 nights of gifts. So did you really get, you didn't get a toy for 8 nights?
The way I remember it, it was kind of the opposite. My mom would give us the big gift on the 8th night of Hanukkah, where so for the first 7 nights, we would get something. We got something every night. It wasn't always a big thing, but something that we would build towards. And, the 8th night would be when I got the Super Nintendo, which I will remember forever. I'm pretty sure that was the 8th night. Although, now that I'm thinking about it, that's weird because it makes more sense to do it the other way. So that way, the other nights you can get a game or a controller or something like that. But I'm pretty sure that's how it worked.
Possibly. But I also used to love the Christmas episodes of TV shows during the Christmas season. Because weirdly, if they reran that episode in April, I'd be like, well, that's stupid. Why would I want to watch this episode?
Right. And now with streaming shows where an entire season drops on whatever day, whatever month, and they will do a Christmas episode, it kind of makes sense that those episodes are released throughout the year based on this new model. But it is still weird when you're binging a new show and it just released and there's a Christmas episode and it's July.
Just like I can watch Die Hard any time of year, even if it is a Christmas movie.
Which it is.
Sure.
As I proved last year.
Yes. But if it's a good movie, I'll watch it any time of year. And that's basically where I am on Christmas things.
Okay, sounds good. But let's talk about It's a Wonderful Life. I had never seen this movie before. Had you seen this movie before?
I have seen this movie exactly once, years ago.
Right, you told me that last week, yes.
I had flown to meet my parents. They were on this long trip in Europe, and I wound up flying out of Brussels in Belgium. And at night, I really had nothing to do. I was walking around Belgium, and I saw there was this old theater that said playing It's a Wonderful Life. But I figured I've never seen this film, and I've heard of it, and I know the general story, because a lot of Christmas episodes of, Family Matters or whatnot would do the whole It's a Wonderful Life thing where, Urkel or whatnot or whatever character would decide, oh, I wish I was never born. It's kind of a trope. So I knew the trope before. I wound up watching it, and it was, I remember it being a very emotional movie when I saw it the first time. And after the first time I saw it in Belgium, I probably saw, little snippets here and there.
Okay. For anyone who hasn't seen It's a Wonderful Life, it's about George Bailey, a resident of Bedford Falls, New York. Young George dreams about traveling the world, but those dreams keep getting sidelined. Instead of going off to college, he stays at home to run the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan after his father dies of a stroke. George gives his college tuition money to his brother Harry, who is supposed to take over the business after he graduates. But when Harry returns home, he's married and has accepted a job with his father-in-law. George falls in love with Mary and plans an adventurous honeymoon, but that falls through when, on their wedding day, there's a run on the local bank and they have to use their wedding gifts to prevent financial ruin for the town. During a trip to the bank, George's Uncle Harry loses an envelope filled with cash, accidentally handing it to Henry Potter, the mean banker who has long hated the Baileys. George fears that he'll be jailed because of the missing money, and he contemplates killing himself. Just then, his guardian angel Clarence appears and shows him what life would be like if he hadn't been born. In this twisted new reality, Harry is dead, Mary is an old maid, and Potter has transformed Bedford Falls into Pottersville, a town with a main street lined with strip clubs and jazz halls. George wishes to go back to his life, and when he does, he finds that the townspeople who he helped in the past have rallied to his cause, raising more than enough money than he needs. The movie ends with George realizing that his guardian angel has finally earned his wings. So when this movie came out in 1946, how did it do at the box office, James?
It had a $3 million budget, and it opened on December 20th, 1946, widely on January 7th, 1947, and it only made a little more than that. I've seen as high as $3.3 million. It was not a big hit when it first came out. Subsequent re-releases and television re-releases are what made it the quote-unquote classic that it is today.
There was a whole story I was reading about the rights for the movie where for a while it was considered public domain because there was some paperwork filed the wrong way or something like that because it was made by RKO, which was acquired by Paramount, which was acquired by Viacom CBS. And somewhere along the way, the rights got lost and everyone just assumed it was public domain. So people were airing it on TV and not paying for it, but then it turned out it wasn't in the public domain. But because of that, it had this new life in the 70s and 80s where it really took off decades after it was kind of a modest hit and not really culturally beloved. But I had never seen this movie before, and even though that's true, I had heard the word Capra-esque referring to the director, Frank Capra. I've never seen another one of his movies. I very much do want to see Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We will have to do that on the podcast at some point, also starring James Stewart. But in my head, I thought that Capra-esque kind of was an equivalent to Rockwellian, meaning, it has this nostalgic Americana vibe. And when this movie started, I was like, okay, yeah, that's what I was expecting. This old-timey kind of look at turn-of-the-century America.
Bedford Falls is a perfect any town at USA.
Right, exactly. And it was cute and sweet. And then there's this brother Harry who's almost going to drown and his brother saves him. And okay, I guess that's life or death technically, but it feels pretty low stakes. You don't really feel like, oh, anyone's going to actually die. But then we get to young George's job where he works at a pharmacist. There's cute little moments with, the girl Mary, who will become his wife, and she has a crush on him. And there's Violet, who has a crush on him because she just loves all boys. But then in the back room, we see that the pharmacist, his son died of influenza. This is right around the time of the flu pandemic of 1918, 1919. And this pharmacist is so stricken with grief that he almost poisons someone who he's filling out a prescription for, and young George doesn't deliver that prescription, and the pharmacist is so mad he starts beating young George, hitting him on his ear where he lost hearing, and apparently in real life the actor hit him so hard that he was really bleeding. And I say all of this because I'm thinking, wow, this got really, really damn dark really fast. I wasn't expecting that turn in tone.
Yes, the kid was slapped for doing something he thought was the adult thought was bad, and it seems obvious the screenwriters did not intend for this. It's funny they call him a druggist, but
Right.
for this pharmacist to be a villain. He slapped this guy, several times in his head. It's a very different take on it in 2024.
Yeah. Also, I think the movie tries to rationalize what the druggist does. One, because he's grieving, also because he's drunk. And there is a lot of alcoholism in this movie. I don't know if that's maybe a leftover thing from Prohibition. Maybe Capra didn't like alcohol. I have no idea. I'm spitballing here. But there are a lot of drunk people in this movie. There's a lot of alcohol is bad kind of moments throughout the movie, which is fine if that's what Capra wanted to say. But again, just kind of darker than I was expecting. Then the movie kind of jumps ahead to George as a 20-something, and when he's at the dance and he's talking with Mary, and then someone says, okay, well, this dance floor is on top of a pool. I'm thinking, well, that's a bad idea. When they started doing the Charleston, I was like, okay, someone's going to go through the floor into the pool and maybe drown or something terrible is going to happen. But no, it's this jealous kid who doesn't like that Mary is dancing with George. Here's a key where you could make the dance floor move and open it up to the pool. And he's like, oh, I'll do that. I'm like, wait, this guy is jealous. He's going to do a murder now? He's going to kill all of these people? He turns a key and then the floor opens up and it's fine. Nothing terrible happens. Everyone just jumps in and it's a silly moment and not an attempted murder. But apparently that is a real thing. There is a Beverly Hills high school where they have a pool underneath the gym floor, and that gym floor did look very, very thick. No one was going to Charleston through that thing.
Yeah, it backfires, and this woman falls more in love with George.
After that scene, George and Mary are walking home, and it's pretty flirty because she's naked, right? She's just wearing a robe. Her clothes were soaked. And then she loses her robe, like he steps on the string or whatever that ties it, and then she jumps into a bush to hide, and he's kind of being a dick about like giving the robe back when he should do it right away. But I don't think it's meant to be, creepy. I think it's just supposed to be flirtatious banter or whatever. But, he has to leave because his father has a stroke. When he's talking to Potter in that scene in the building and loan, he really goes off on Potter, but also capitalism. Like, I was kind of blown away by that scene because really what George is saying is that for Potter, this rich asshole, he just looks at the people of Bedford Falls as, I forget what he calls them, riffraff or something, the rabble. They're just things for him to own and manipulate, but they're people. And Potter says, well, they should just save up to buy a house. And, it's kind of that thing that people say now about, oh, you just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah, neat, but that's really impossible for a lot of people. George says these people deserve dignity and homes and, lives that they can be proud of. It sounded very Bernie Sanders-esque to me. I felt like this was progressive, possibly, maybe depending on your point of view, socialist. And apparently, I read this today, the FBI flagged this movie for being communist propaganda because they make Potter, the banker, out to be the villain, which is what communists do, according to this one FBI report. And I don't think this movie is communist propaganda, but I do think the movie does have some anti-capitalistic messaging in there.
There's definitely a couple speeches in this film that absolutely resonate today. However, I would not call this film anti-capitalist. I think it's maybe anti-unregulated capitalism because it's saying the savings alone, they're the good guys. Everyone in town's a good guy. Martini's a good guy. And all these people trying to make a business. This is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with capitalism. And, Martini comes to America and he needs a little break. So he needs a couple bucks to start his business. But everyone loves his Italian food. So, he's going to make a great business. And a guy like Martini in America could make millions. But it's someone like Potter. I don't think it's necessarily, they're making references to Potter being a bad guy for being rich, but they make references like, you used to live in one of those Potter shacks. Like, they're terrible, terrible places. Yes, I agree.
A slumlord.
Yeah. Well, a slumlord is not someone who owns a lot of properties. A slumlord is someone who will throw out a family of 5 if they're a day late on their rent. And also the places that he's going to throw this lady and her kids out the day after rent is going to be a shithole.
Yeah.
Potter's also, he's very Mr. Burns-esque. Like, He's just kind of evil. I mean, they say at one point, like, how much more do you want? And then his response is, oh, what? So I should just give it to freeloaders like you? He's just an evil, evil guy that just doesn't want to help anyone. He's not like Ebenezer Scrooge, that in the end, he winds up seeing the light and, he winds up donating some money. He doesn't do that.
Lionel Barrymore is the actor who played Potter and Drew Barrymore's great uncle, apparently. But he played Ebenezer Scrooge in a radio play. So he was used to kind of doing that voice. And I think you're right. Like, A Christmas Carol makes Ebenezer Scrooge, I guess, the hero, or at least the protagonist. And I like that in this version, the old miser is the antagonist and not the protagonist. I think this is a more relatable story. I think for most people, when you watch A Christmas Carol, you can love A Christmas Carol, but you don't relate to Ebenezer Scrooge. In this movie, you can much more easily relate to George Bailey.
I'd read a piece of trivia that there was something called the Hays Code that had been in place in 1945 or 46 when this movie came out, that generally the bad guys were always supposed to either repent or they were killed. Like, that's what happened in every cowboy film. They either definitely repented or they died or they went to jail. Some comeuppance has to happen. In this film, Potter kind of ends up with $8,000.
Yes, I talked about the Hays Code in our Some Like It Hot episode, and that was, I think, in the 50s when the Hays Code was kind of losing its influence. At this time, it was very important, and this movie technically does violate the Hays Code because Potter gets away with the crime. He suffers no consequences. He is not punished. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't give the money back. And a villain in a cowboy movie can't get away with a crime. Gangsters in a gangster movie can't get away with a crime. But a banker? Yeah, sure, that's fine. That's not even a crime. So I think that does kind of also stand the test of time. No one from the 2008 financial crisis ever was convicted or anything. Like, bankers don't commit crimes. It's fine. They don't have to suffer any consequences. This is American tradition. This goes back decades. Of course, it's bullshit, but there you go. So George and Mary end up getting married, and then on their wedding day, there's a run on the bank. And I've heard of that from social studies or history or whatever, but the way that they describe it in the movie is, well, that over there sure looks like a run on the bank, is what I think Bert, the cab driver, says. I don't know if that's really what a run on a bank looks like, because I've never seen one, or if maybe that's just a little hand-holding for the audience. This is a powerful scene because it shows George's character and his willingness to do whatever it takes to help other people. He gives up this honeymoon that he was so looking forward to, where he was going to go on these adventures with his beloved Mary. And, he's just doling out all of his money for the townspeople. And I was watching this kind of not really understanding the mechanics of the finances, like just how this was going to save everybody, because the way that they explain it is that he's keeping everyone afloat for a week until the bank gets more money, and then after a week the bank will be able to take over their debt or something. I don't really need to know all of the mechanics of it. I'm okay with that being a yada 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 thing. But in the next scene, there's this Bailey Park that he's built where there's, affordable housing for the poor people of this town, which is lovely and wonderful. But for a second, I'm like, hold on a second. Did George just fix the Great Depression by handing out some cash? Like, did he prevent this entire town from, the Depression? I mean, that seems really nice, but also totally unrealistic.
Probably. Assuming this was not the 1929, everything is going to be bad for a couple years. Maybe that particular bank was failing and there was a run on that bank, or maybe Bedford Falls was falling. In the context of this movie, yes, Al, George Bailey does save the Depression. He fixes the Depression for Bedford Falls. It's either, do you want to go to Tahiti or do you want everyone in Bedford Falls to die? And he does the right thing.
Yeah, he does. And also, while we're talking about glossing over shitty parts of history, the part where they show you what happens during World War II is almost laughable in the way that they gloss over the unbelievable atrocities of World War II, where they basically kind of make it look super awesome. Nobody dies. A lot of people from Bedford Falls go to World War II and they all come home. They're all fine. George's brother Harry is a hero, and that's great because we like Harry and we want him to survive. But there's no stories of, that one tertiary character who you introduced in the very beginning and then forgot about.
One toast to Teddy they could have done.
Exactly. Yeah. Like nothing bad happens. While I watched the movie, I was a little bit rolling my eyes at that. But then when I was reading about it today, Frank Capra and James Stewart, they were in World War II. This was the first movie they made after they came home. I read more about it with Jimmy Stewart, but he had PTSD. He was not okay. He was an actor and was living the Hollywood life. Then he went to Europe and killed people. And, that affected him, which is totally understandable and relatable because holy shit. But the movie really just kind of makes it seem like, oh, poor George, he doesn't get to go to the war because he's deaf in one ear, so he has to stay at home and do war bonds, which is boring and lame. I was just kind of surprised by how the movie sort of paints World War II as, yay, it was great, from guys who know better.
We've never in a long, long time had such a good versus evil. You just had to beat Hitler. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there was still this jingoistic, it was a fight against evil and good won. That's all we have to talk about.
That makes sense because this movie comes out in 46. Let's just do the happy version of it. But that scene that I'm talking about, like the montage of World War II, that is being described to Clarence, the guardian angel. And I gotta be honest, at this point, I had kind of forgotten all about the angels because we see them in the very, very beginning of the movie that everyone is praying for help for George Bailey. Then, you see him as like a little kid, and then there's more VO from the angels talking when it transitions to him as a 20-something. And then you're just kind of like watching the life of George Bailey. And I forgot about the angels. I forgot about the whole guardian angel. I forgot about the suicide attempt. I honestly even kind of forgot that this was supposed to be a Christmas movie. I watched the movie on Amazon Prime, and this pisses me off to no end because I pay for Prime. There were still ads in the middle of the movie, just once kind of halfway through. And, when the commercial started, first I was grumbling about the goddamn ads, but then I was like, wait a second. I could have sworn this was a Christmas movie. I picked it for our Christmas episode. There's nothing about this movie that is Christmas-esque at all. And then you kind of get into it. But what this movie is famous for, what I knew about this movie, even though I'd never seen it, was it's a Christmas movie, and he imagines what life would be like without him, and then the guardian angel comes, and the angel gets its wings, and all of that. Like, that has seeped into pop culture, but that's the last, 20 to 30 minutes of the movie. It is, for a very long stretch, just the life story of George Bailey. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and honestly, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because I was so into the story of George Bailey and Mary and all the people of Bedford Falls, I just completely lost sight of all of that. But the reason why George is suicidal, which leads to the guardian angel and everything, is because the uncle lost $8,000 in cash. I read before how much that is in today's money, and I forgot what it is, but it was an obscene amount, like maybe six figures, that he had in cash. He brings to the bank, and then he's so busy taunting Potter that he accidentally folds it up in the newspaper and hands it to Potter. And I do have to say that I kind of hate that that is the incident that causes George to be suicidal. I get it, because just minutes ago, I was complaining about how I didn't understand how George saves the town from the Depression. And I think if you really got into minutia of fiduciary law, fiscal responsibility, and misappropriations, the audience's eyes would glaze over. I was boring myself just using those words that I don't understand. A misplaced envelope is simple. This is a simple way for George to potentially be ruined, but it just feels so anticlimactic. And George is really good at money and finances and the building and trust, and he's saved the town. He saved the town from the Depression, but a lost envelope of cash being the thing that drives him to suicide, I kind of just hated that part.
I agree with you, Al. It was missing one thing. It was missing something like Martini coming to him with all of his cash and being like, this is the whole years of cash. I'm finally depositing it. And I trust you, George. And that's the money he loses. And something like Martini's going to go under and his whole family's going to go under. I thought there had to be something a little more personal than just he's going to go to jail, because I just didn't think, or I hoped, that the justice system, I don't know, he lost money. I guess if he also showed up with a new Cadillac, maybe, but
right.
And also, it wasn't even George Bailey. The last person that had it was the uncle. So I agree, It could have been something a little bit better. And I did remember that the uncle is dumb. I didn't remember what he does, but I remember the uncle was dumb. And throughout the film, he's definitely portrayed as very sweet, but there's a reason why he was not really left in charge to run the savings alone.
I don't think he's dumb. He's a drunk.
Okay, fine. He's always drunk, and he's just not dependable.
Right. So after the drunk uncle loses the money, George does yell at the uncle, but he really yells at Mary and his four kids and the daughter Zuzu's teacher, who he yells and screams at on the phone. And I also didn't love the scene where he loses his temper, and I don't even want to say lose his temper. I just want to say crash out. Eli says that all the time. It's the same thing. But when George crashes out, he is nasty and angry, and we saw it earlier in the film. He crashed out with Mary when he was pissed off after Harry came back from college and he was married. But the way that they portray these crash outs isn't the most compelling, because George basically acts like the bizarro version of himself.
Yep.
He is the opposite of the George Bailey who we know and love. And some people, when they lose their temper, that's what they're like. It's perfectly realistic, but it's not very compelling for a movie, because some people say stuff that's really mean. And even though it sounds like something that they wouldn't say, it still sounds like them. And so it hurts more. You know what I mean? Like you're angry and you're pissed off and you're saying the shit that it feels like you always wanted to say. And George doesn't do that. George is just bizarro evil version of George. And I think maybe that's wise for this movie that doesn't really want to make George anything other than a likable guy. And so when it's bizarro George, it's easier to just say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Of course you didn't mean it. Yay, all is forgiven. As opposed to he says some really hurtful things that are frankly tougher to apologize for. I just felt like that would have been more interesting.
I just think in the end, it just wasn't a good enough spark to induce that. Or I didn't feel the personal effect other than, I guess he says he's going to jail, but I don't know. I would have liked to see like all those nice townspeople, personally, all their money, they're all through if like this is gone, something like that.
Right. And when George goes crawling to Potter, begging for some help, Potter says, oh, what are you going to do? Go and ask the rabble that you love? They're going to give you money? Yeah, right. They'll run you out of town. And I believe that Potter would believe that, but I don't believe that George would believe that. You know what I mean? Like, he should know better. He should think, no, they wouldn't. Wait a second. Actually, that's a great idea. And that is what ultimately happens. It's foreshadowing, but there's no reason for George to buy that line from Potter.
Not necessarily. George is really the only one in this town that makes sacrifices. No one else makes the sacrifices that George makes. And
True.
I don't think he necessarily had faith. I think he's shocked that it happens at the end.
Yeah, he definitely is. Also, though, you said you didn't really understand why he would go to jail. He's like going to jail that night, and it's Christmas Eve, and yeah, I get it. Like, Potter owns the cops because he's the most powerful man in town. But also, no, that's not how it works. Like, you wouldn't get arrested for $8,000 being missing on Christmas Eve. There would be an investigation. Maybe you'd have to answer some questions on December 26th. But yeah, no one's coming to arrest you on Christmas Eve. But that does lead to George on the bridge contemplating suicide and the introduction of Clarence. Kind of. He was introduced in the very beginning of the movie, but it is long into the movie before you see him in the flesh. He says he's an AS2, which stands for Angel Second Class, which does not make sense as an acronym. Angel Second Class would be A2C, not AS2.
I think it's a military thing. Private First Class is PFC.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Angel Second Class, didn't he say A2C?
No, he said AS2.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it said AS2. Oh, I'm sorry. But I didn't pick that up, but I did. I was going to AS2. I was glad when he explained what it was because I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very, very stupid criticism. And Clarence doesn't go into the situation with the idea of showing him what life would be like without him, but he does. And then we're into this parallel version of Bedford Falls called Pottersville. One could argue this is maybe the first multiverse movie, which would definitely stand the test of time. There's lots of multiverse movies now. And it is very Back to the Future Part 2-esque, right? Because now George exists in this world where he doesn't exist and nobody knows him and everything is different and it's filled with sin and jazz clubs and strip clubs and so many strip clubs. I mean, this is a small town. Like, if it had a strip club or two, that would be a scandal. But like Main Street has like 17 of them.
Yeah, but I think they also make it very clear to the audience what's going on, to this audience that's never seen a quote unquote multiverse film.
Right.
They basically say the whole universe existed up until the birth of George Bailey. Harry's still born, but he dies in an accident.
Right. And I know you're not supposed to think about any of this.
Can I guess?
Sure.
Why would Harry be out that day? Because he's hanging out with his brother going out in the pond?
Sure, yes. But I was even going to go farther back than that. If George isn't born, wouldn't his parents try again to have another kid? And maybe there's a different kid a month later. Maybe they have twins when they conceive the next time, and then there is no Harry.
No. This is clearly what if I was never born, not what if a different kid was born instead of me. I think they're just taking that guy out of the situation. You're putting another variable in. I think it's fair that all they're doing is the one variable. We're literally just removing you from the universe and seeing what happens.
But if you assume that Ma and Pa Bailey wanted to have a kid and they were trying to conceive, and then George Bailey isn't born, why would they then wait another 3 years or however until Harry's born?
Because that would not show a good lesson.
Of course.
No, but I'm even saying if you're an angel and you're able to do this magic, you have to do that. Because presumably, the second brother would be probably a good guy too, and he'd also save Harry.
Right.
So he'd basically learn, if I was never born, then Scott Bailey would have been the good guy.
Exactly.
And even Scott isn't necessary because then it would have been Doug Bailey.
Sure. And I realize that this is a level of parsing apart the details and minutia that no one would do and that you're not supposed to do.
Podcasts do this. No. I think movie podcasts are supposed to do this kind of stupid stuff.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for justifying it. But yeah, I mean, what you said was right. What Clarence is doing is showing a universe with just George removed, and the dominoes fall after he has been removed from the equation. And this part of the movie is pretty short. It's maybe 15, 20 minutes that we spend in Pottersville.
Yeah, that's effective.
Yeah, it is. We spend way too much time in Martini's bar, I think. I felt like they could have moved that scene along a little bit. But that scene is where we first learn when a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. And Clarence says that, and he ought to know because he's an angel. But then they're all making fun of it because every time the cash register goes off, there's a bell. I thought that was kind of stupid. Like, it can be a bell, but if then you're going to make the joke that, oh, every time I open the cash register, when someone at this terrible bar buys a terrible drink from this very mean bartender, an angel gets his wings? What? That doesn't make any sense.
Just make it church bells.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
And it's only on Sundays and wonderful days like a wedding. I was thinking the same thing because the bartender that doesn't believe them in the evil Potterville, he's like, I'll make a lot of angel wings. Ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. I'm like, what a wonderful guy. He just gave 4 angels wings. But I don't think he meant to do that. So,
No.
I don't think it should be any metal hitting another dome-like piece of metal should not cause an angel to get their wings.
Right. I also thought it was a little ridiculous that in this alternate version, Mary is an old maid. First off, don't call her old because she's 30-something. Donna Reed, I think, was 35 or so when they shot this movie, and she's beautiful. And maybe I could stretch it a little bit that in these old days, if you're in your 30s and unmarried, you would be considered an old maid. Life expectancy, old timiness, whatever. But come on, this is a beautiful woman. If George Bailey doesn't exist, why wouldn't she have just married Sam, the friend who was clearly into her, the guy who kept saying hee-haw for some reason, or someone else?
Yeah, I thought that was poorly done. I thought there should have been some other reason why she winds up going off to Antarctica to do research and she becomes an old maid. Something like that. I get what they mean, that she never found love because she didn't find George Bailey, which is weird because, she's a nice lady and she's Donna Reed. So,
right.
Because this just basically said she stuck around Bedford Falls, but she stayed in the library, so no one wanted her. Like, isn't that the perfect wife in 1946? Like, she has a nice job, but it's like, now she'd be an old maid because she's a librarian.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. There is a moment where I think it's Bert the cab driver and Ernie the cop, or maybe I switched those.
Ernie's the cab driver.
Okay, whatever. But like they are together and it's like, hey, Bert, yeah, Ernie. From my perspective, I'm like, oh, like Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street. And apparently there was an urban legend that Jim Henson named Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street based on these characters. And the other guy who was with him when they were naming the characters said that that's not true. And that Jim Henson did love It's a Wonderful Life, but had a terrible memory for details like that. And he wouldn't have remembered those particular names and it's just a coincidence. And they thought, when they made that Muppet, oh, that looks like a Bert. So that's why they named it. But it was kind of funny. It made me chuckle when they were like, hey, Bert and Ernie. But George wishes to go back. He goes back. He's so excited to be alive again, and everyone in the town knows him. He's reunited with his family. The townspeople have raised more than enough money. Then they get a call from Sam, who's over in Europe, who had made a ton of money in plastics, and George didn't want to invest because he was like, no, I'll stay here, and plastics, whatever. Sam says, I've wired $20,000 or $25,000 or something like that. That's very nice and very generous, and he's friends with George and Mary and everything. But I kind of was expecting them to say, oh, well, we can just give this basket of cash back to the townspeople because the rich guy in Europe paid for it. We're good. You guys need this money more than he does.
Basically that is what happens, Al, because every single dollar is in a ledger. They're definitely taking notes on how much everyone's giving. So I do think it's understood that everyone will give their money back, because the whole point of this was that George Bailey has always bailed everyone out. And even when they just needed $20. So in this case, everyone gave like $20. That's if the whole town gives $20, you don't need that many people to raise $8,000, especially when a couple people raise more than that. But yes, I think Hua gets his, or Hee-Haw he pays for the whole thing in the end.
Okay, all right. Also, then at the very end, there's a bell that rings, and the daughter Zuzu says, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. And George, of course, says, yes, that's right. And now my friend Clarence gets his wings. I was a little bit expecting him, when he hears teacher says, to think, oh shit, the teacher, I totally cursed out the teacher. I'm going to have to apologize to her. Oops. And of course that doesn't happen because that would be a different kind of movie.
Yeah. That teacher was kind of a funny subplot, but it's not resolved. I mean, George should have, as he's running through the town, kissed him on the forehead or something. It doesn't get resolved, but I think, as George, everything's okay.
Right. But James, let me ask you, what do you think about It's a Wonderful Life? Do you think the movie stands the test of time?
The movie does stand the test of time. There's a lot of things that, not a lot of things. There's a couple of things that don't really hold up. There was one part when all the men are chasing after Violet, and Violet only wants George. But there's all these men that she's flirting with, and then she leaves them hanging while she flirts with George. And they go, we'll wait for you, baby. Today, you know what they call those guys?
Incels? Or no, I've heard Eli say this.
What's your favorite cartoon of all time?
The Simpsons. Oh, a simp.
Yeah, simp. So I was like, look at those simps. We're always going to write fairy tales about George Baileys that are always going to be there, and Robin Hoods that are going to help the poor, even in the face of the rich. I agree with you. There's a big problem with George's motivation for killing himself. It's missing a couple lines there that really drive why George completely fucked up, and this is irrecoverable. They could have made it just yet another compromise I can't do. I've done compromise my whole life, and that's the only part, but that's a plot thing. I think, every movie can have flaws and still be a wonderful film that stands the test of time. So, yes, for me. What do you think, Al? You'd never seen the film. It's almost 80 years old. Does it stand the test of time?
Absolutely, it does. There are a few things that haven't aged well. Anytime they say any dollar amount, you kind of have to laugh because everything is just so goddamn inexpensive back then. Also, I do think that there is some shorthand in terms of, oh, it's a run on the bank, and the war, the druggist's son died of the flu, where the audience in 1946 understands those things instantly. And I didn't watch this with the kids, but if I did, I would have probably had to maybe pause some of those moments and explain what some of those things were. Maybe not. Maybe they've learned all that in social studies already. The one thing that really leapt out at me from a test of time perspective is the jump cuts. I think I counted 3 jump cuts in this movie, and this word will sound melodramatic, But I think that is just unacceptable in a movie today. Even a low budget movie released in 2024, they're not going to have a jump cut.
Can you remind people what a jump cut is, Anno?
Sure. It's just a bad edit where you can clearly see the edit. The reference that I would give you, because I know you'll understand this, James, is that episode of The Simpsons when Homer is accused of touching the babysitter's butt, and his quote-unquote confession is very, very clearly edited of, I saw the babysitter. You know, like you can clearly tell it's all spliced together. That's what a jump cut looks like when the people are in this part of the frame 1 second. It's supposed to be continuous, but then they're just kind of over a couple of inches. It's a jump cut. It's a bad edit. And you would not have one in a movie today. And this movie has several of them. Whatever. That's a small complaint. This is a beautiful, beautiful movie. And also kind of dark. He's contemplating suicide. You don't get much darker than that. That is pretty fucking bleak. There is depressing stuff in this movie. This movie is in a lot of ways about how George has given up everything and just keeps giving up pieces of himself until he loses the will to live. I mean, that's fucking morose. It's not hard to imagine a version of this story with a few details changed where this is not a story of a guy who's a lovable hero of this town. It could be Potter's origin story. This could be a villain origin story where he tried to do good, but life just kept beating him down, and eventually he grows old and angry and cantankerous and hateful. George could have gone down that path were it not for the help of the guardian angel and the love of Mary and his children and the townspeople who all loved him. And all of those things are very, very important. But it has some really dark shit in there. The holidays are always stressful. I think it's like a thing that suicides are in real life more prevalent in December around Christmas, which, you know, kind of violates the whole it's the happiest time of the year thing. But it's depressing for a lot of people. Also, though, it is so beautiful and uplifting. I was crying at the end of this movie. Happy tears that I honestly kind of needed right now. Real talk, being really honest, I've been in a funk since the election. I've been depressed. I wish that wasn't true, but it is. And I think this movie serves as a really powerful reminder that, yeah, it's a wonderful life. Things are great. If you have friends, if you have a family, if you have people who love you, if you have people who respect you and people who care about you, it's a wonderful life. What more do you need?
What does Clarence say at the end? What does he inscribe at the end? Like, no man is truly alone that has friends or something.
Yeah, something like that. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful message. I needed it watching this movie now in December 2024. I think people will always need it. I think this is going to resonate forever and ever. This is a classic movie. I can't believe I'd never seen it before, but it 1,000% stands the test of time. Despite my complaints about, you know, little things about him fixing the depression and whatever, I love this movie. And you know what? I would also say this movie filled me with the Christmas spirit. How about you?
It definitely filled me with joy. I mean, you know, I didn't really want to buy anything.
Well, that's the real meaning of Christmas, not the commercial
exactly.
crap. One other thing that's neither here nor there, I saw that Steven Spielberg says that It's a Wonderful Life is one of his favorite movies. When I saw that, I couldn't help but think that this movie does have a little bit of common DNA with Schindler's List. I realize that they're very, very different in myriad ways, but they're both black and white. They're both set in the same historical time period, and they're both about the ways that one man can really touch a lot of lives just by deciding to help. A good man who wants to help others can have a huge, huge impact. That is a theme of both movies. I just found that interesting. Just wanted to mention that. But that's going to do it for our Christmas episode. Next week, we're going to be joined by special guest Jason Torres. He's coming on the show to talk about Four Rooms. That's a movie that takes place on New Year's Eve. That will be our New Year's Eve episode. Really looking forward to having Jason back on the show. That'll be a great time. In the meantime, we want to hear from you guys, the listeners. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. Write to us. Let us know what you think about Frank Capra and Jimmy Stewart and Don Reed and Guardian Angels and Christmas Spirit. Whatever. We love hearing from you. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Merry Christmas, movie house.